Welcome to the Final Frontiers radio show, where we spotlight inspiring missionary endeavors around the globe. Stay tuned to hear how you can personally get involved, helping the Lord's frontline soldiers effectively advance the gospel where it has never been preached before. Today, we'll have a special episode that recaps this past year of the Final Frontiers radio show, highlighting some of our most favorite stories from the past 12 months. Hello, this is Joshua Martin.
And this is Daniel Nelms.
And today we have a special episode. It's really a recap episode of the entire Season 2 that we've done this whole year. And a lot has happened. We've put out a lot of material, so many different interviews, so many different personalities and people really that we've had. We've had a lot of visiting preachers this year. We tried to interview people that are not, some of them aren't even supported by Final Frontiers, but we were highlighting their ministries. So we have all kinds of people out here. The very first episode, we had a personal friend of ours, Gil Anger, missionary from Australia. He's a world missionary. And if you go to episode 1, you will see an interview with him highlighting his ministries. And then another different thing that we started doing here in Season 2 is we tried to get women to call in, women missionaries, even my sister, my pastor's wife, who had been a missionary in Malawi. If you go to episode 3, you're going to find out that there's a whole story there from her. We had, like I said, special friends that would call in and they're not even supported by us, but just people who had been to different countries. I had a friend of mine who, in episode 4, went to Iceland. And that's something you just don't hear about much. And he talked about the culture there. He talked about what it's like to be a missionary there. Your dad, his friend Don Kaiser, ministry in Mexico. I think John did that one himself.
He did.
And that's someone that I didn't know as much about, but I did get to interview him.
Fortunately, he has passed away this year.
And that happened not that long after we interviewed him.
Yeah, that was one of his last public addresses, I believe.
I think one of the first times that we had him on here was episode 8. So if you go back and you scroll down through the show notes and you look for that, you can hear from Brother Don Kaiser. He was a huge influence on your dad.
Yeah, he was. And you were talking about some of the women who have been interviewed, and I remember Katya Ellis, her story and her testimony was just amazing. She was in chemical engineering in Russia and developing paints that they put on boats to keep barnacles from growing on them. And she ended up marrying Brother Dennis, and they have, they just still have such a great ministry. So there's so much content that we produced this year that's just really good stuff. And it's comforting to know that it's still there, it's still available, even though it came out months ago, and you may be listening to this years after 2018. It should still be available to you because of the archives and because of the internet.
We started introducing things like the Timothy Project as well, where we had a voice come on and they're giving you a story from the actual written testimony of a young man who's in the ministry. We started doing that about once a month. That started happening towards the end of the season. But some of the other people we had a pastor's friend of mine, Mark Gilmore. He talks about multiplying churches. He started talking in episode 9. We had someone that we visited, the Smojis in Romania. Wow, I mean, that was more about daily bread. We brought that in.
Phenomenal work.
Yeah, episode 10, we had him come in, and that became kind of our commercial for Daily Bread, explaining what that is and what we do. And boy, the things that he does in Romania and the poverty of those gypsy kids, we talked about that. We talked about on the edge of Bhutan in India, where it's a closed Buddhist country, and we had given our man there a power pack, someone that I've been able to visit several times. We got him on the phone and he was talking, and that's actually a kind of a secret project, some of that, because they're training men to go over the border when they're not even allowed to be there. We got to talk to him. We talked about the boot camp. We talked about the Reach Beyond Borders boot camp, extreme missions that we are promoting. It's something that I'm involved in quite a bit. Daniel and I had an episode, I think it was, episode 14. We just talked about spiritual warfare. You remember that?
Oh, yeah, very much.
Some of the crazy things that happened to you on the mission field, things that have happened to him and me personally, just personal stories of stuff that we've endured.
Unfortunately, those are things that you'll never forget.
We had another lady, we're talking about ladies here. I had a lady that I know in the country of Azerbaijan, and that is a 96% Muslim country, and she talks about trying to reach people there and what her husband is doing. She talked about her women's ministry that she does and just some of the heartache that they go through. It's tough in countries like that. And we are not showing some of these people, their names don't even come up, but we tell you the story, and you get to hear their voice. If you go to these episodes, you actually get to hear them talk one-on-one. That was episode 15 that she was in. What about Babu? We had him. Lots of things from Babu. The first time we started hearing from some of them was, I think, episode 18, episode 20. Some of those you get to talk, you hear about the leper colony, you hear about some of Babu's ministry.
Yeah, he's giving away Power Packs, Power Pack Nanos.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of burdens, a lot of projects going on all the time. He's heading up a project for printing and distributing Clean Heart tracts in India. It's getting more and more difficult to bring in or ship in gospel tracts from other countries into India. So we're actually able to print them and produce them there in country, so we don't have to worry about any of those obstacles.
We also talked with a man in Burma, our director there in Myanmar. It's presently called Myanmar. That's Vel Siama. And his testimony and his preachers, the children, we started talking about that, episode 19 and beyond. Once you hear a guy for the first time, if you wait about 4 or 5 weeks, we'll have another interview from them. Sometimes 2 interviews, sometimes 3 interviews if you listen. So if there's a guy that you particularly like, I can think of a guy we had in Cambodia that talked a couple of times. We've always got somebody different on there. You remember when we did episode 21, we had fevers and sicknesses. You and I talked about that.
Oh, man.
That was a rough one.
Oh, that was rough. Just kind of rehashing some of the stuff that's happened in the past.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I did a 2-part episode starting in episode 22, where I talked about the story that a lot of churches have me speak on, which was what happened in Peru. What we call dangers, toils, and snares. The really rough trip that we almost died, my brother-in-law and myself, Jason Dover. And there's episodes where he is in there very early in the season and elsewhere where you hear him talking. You hear my sister talking about what it's like to be home in these jungle trips and the tax that comes on her when her husband's working in the jungle. So we had Morgan Jackson, too. We had... From Faith Comes by Hearing.
He told us about all the different things that they're working on, and they have just such a wonderful work. I mean, we use their content on our Power Pack devices. We've been using their stuff for years, and it's just wonderful. It really is. And I can't give them enough props. Those guys are amazing out there in Albuquerque.
That was episode 25. I use their app, too, just the Bible listening app. You can get any kind of language you want. Just pull it up, and you've got it on your phone saved
instantly.
Yeah.
I mean, you're on a bus, with someone who speaks a different language. You can figure out, more or less what language they're speaking, and then, pull up the Bible. Mm-hmm. Start playing that in their language. You watch their face, just like, how did they do this?
There were some episodes even after 25 where he talked, and it just brought me to tears listening to some of the amazing stories that he had. We had biographies that we started doing, where we had guys from Guatemala, we had guys from India, Kenya, and every month you'd hear a different one. That started happening in episode 25 as well.
Yeah.
So
those were all from our video series biographies, which you can check out on our YouTube channel also.
And if you're in the show notes, you can actually see every time one of those radio shows comes out, you look in the show notes on the website there.
FinalFrontiers.world.
And you will see an actual link to that video. Any of the videos, if we have a video about what we're talking about, there's a link to it there. Or if there's a person that you wanted to get a hold of that you heard, I have always got a link in there to where you can call them up or you can visit their website and talk to the man that you have been hearing. We had stories from our debriefings. There were a lot of debriefings, actually some of them that did not make it to the video series, but were very special. Like when I was sent up through some of the holy cities in India and visited some holy sites that are very important to Buddhism and Hinduism. And we had debriefings on that where Daniel and I will talk and we'll go over those stories. And then we started getting into our roundtables. I think that started in, somewhere around, here's one here where we talked about the Tulipan, episode 31. We started talking about the Tulipan and the project that we were going to do. And that happened, and we kept you updated. So if you watch for those, you look in the show notes, you can see Tulipan. You'll see when we're going to Honduras.
Yeah. That project was something that was on all of our hearts here for a number of years. But the idea to distribute it in audio form and do it in such a massive way didn't happen until towards the end of last year. As we were working with the Yene project, which, by the way, has been completed. We just
Yes.
haven't been able to get down to Peru to do the documentary about that. It's just been one little setback after the other. But that project's done. The Tulipron project is done. I just imagine that 2 entire people groups on this earth have now been evangelized. They've heard the gospel. They have access to it daily in their homes. It's overwhelming.
And you can follow our progress with that if you're keeping in touch with these podcasts. You can go back through and you can look for those. Dennis Ellis was another one that I really liked. He told a story about a Volkswagen. I'll edit
VW
that.
Bug. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was something else. That story, and I think that same episode 33, we introduced Ernest Livingston. We started talking about what we were going to do with the video series there. And at Thanksgiving, we even called Ernest Livingston in Africa. So if you're a fan of that and you loved watching those videos, you can actually hear him in Africa talking to, it was you and Michael and your dad.
Yeah.
We had stories in here that were directly Touch of Life, telling some amazing stories about Touch of Life children. That happened. It's usually once a month or every other month we'd get a story about that. And we had your dad in here telling personal stories just recently, episode 44, about the Vietnam scorpion issue, where he should have died.
Absolutely.
We had that. We had another one with another one that happened in Thailand, story that he just told. Episode 47, I had my niece, Grace Dover. And so you're not only getting people who are in their 30s or their 40s or their 60s on here, but I got someone in here that was 13 years old, and she grew up on the mission field, and you got to hear just a little bit of her perspective, just a little bit of her testimony in episode 47. So there's a huge variety. If you go back through all the way up to recent days, we've been trying to keep variety in there for you. So like we said, go through the show notes, and it's been a fun year, but that's some of the content that we've had.
Yeah, this really has been an amazing year. So much has happened. It's even hard for me to keep track of. But we hope that 2019 brings us even more progress, and there's just so much stuff that's even happening now that's sort of under the radar that you guys don't know about yet, but there's going to be some pretty interesting stuff coming out in the coming months. So we hope that you enjoyed all of what we produced so far, and that you'll keep on listening and keep on telling your friends to listen.
Exactly. Please share.
Yeah.
If we can say anything, is share on Facebook, share on the YouTube channel, share the podcast, tell
Twitter,
people that it's
email,
available.
anything that you can do.
Yeah. The people out there that think like you, that love missions. If you're listening to this right now, you are one of those unique people that love missions. So please help us share.
It's estimated that, I was reading this the other day, so I'm going to throw out a number here, but I'd have to check and see if this was the right number. I believe it was less than 0.5% of American church-going Christians are interested in missions. So just try to wrap your head around how unique you are and how special you are. And, they say birds of a feather flock together. I'm sure that you also know people who, they love missions. So if you haven't told them about this podcast, please consider doing so.
Yes. And thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Would you like for World Missions to be fresh and exciting in your home? Here at Final Frontiers, we are hard at work to produce a full color magazine report with inspiring stories, important global facts, and missions opportunities and updates every quarter throughout the year. You can sign up for your copy at finalfrontiers.world.
At age 11, I felt a call to missions. From that point on, I listened and learned from every missionary I met. I became convinced, merely by their examples, that I had to learn another language to be a missionary. So as I grew older, I naturally wondered why there were missionaries serving in England, Australia, Belize, and other English-speaking countries. As I began to study the Bible, I couldn't find any place where Paul preached to Gentiles in any language other than Greek, a language as common to Paul as English is to me. As I studied his ministry methods, I began to see a pattern emerge. His emphasis was on penetrating cities that were the cultural seats of a surrounding region. Each community was distinguished by its own primary or patron god or goddess. These may have also been known in other regions, but were not as fervently worshipped outside their patron city. Corinth primarily worshipped Apollo. Ephesus worshipped Diana. Athens, of course, worshipped Athena. And when Paul and Barnabas first began to evangelize in Lystra, Timothy's hometown, They were believed to actually be the gods Jupiter and Mercury. Besides each region having their own regional god, they also had their own regional language, just as Paul had his native language, Hebrew. Through military occupation, languages often died, but even when a local language survived, the people were typically forced to speak the language of the empire. Statistically today, a language dies every 2 weeks, and 96% of the world speaks one of 4 languages. So then, it's not the languages you speak that makes you a missionary. It's the message you proclaim. Missionaries don't really have to be bilingual if English is well known locally or if they have an interpreter. And for the record, there are 225 million English speakers in America, but there are 220 million in India and Pakistan. I'm John Nelms. To learn more about missions, order a copy of my book, The Great Omission, on our website at finalfrontiers.world.
Your inquiries and comments are important to us. If you have questions or perhaps subject matter you would like to have addressed on this show, please visit us at finalfrontiers.world.
You've been listening to the Final Frontiers radio show, funded by sponsors like you. Thank you so much for joining us. Through the funding of national and native preachers, we endeavor to effectively advance the gospel where it has never been preached before. If you want more information, visit www.finalfrontiers.world. That's finalfrontiers.world.